Have you ever found yourself staring at a page, reading something just incredibly dense and complicated, only to slowly realize the author wasn't actually saying anything at all?
Oh, yeah. It is a universally frustrating experience, honestly.
Right. You spend all this mental energy navigating this massive labyrinth of jargon, and you just assume the sheer difficulty of the text means there's some, I don't know, profound truth hidden inside.
Exactly. Because the human brain is wired to search for meaning. So when we encounter really complex language, we naturally assume a high level of intellectual value.
Yeah, but then underneath it all, the message is completely hollow.
Right, and discovering that you've been led down a dead end by someone's ego rather than their actual insight, it feels like a betrayal of that cognitive effort.
It really does, which implies that the act of writing, or communicating in any form really, carries this unwritten contract between the speaker and the audience.
100%.
And that brings up a fascinating question about what we are actually doing when we deploy language. And that is the mission of our deep dive today.
And we have a fantastic source for this.
We do. We are looking at Chapter 7 of a truly thought-provoking book. It's called Thus Spoke Confucius' Philosophy of Literature by the philosopher Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily.
It is such a rich text.
So we are going to unpack Al-Waily's profound perspective on what literature actually is at its core. And spoiler alert for everyone listening, he argues it is not just about, pretty words or rhyming couplets.
Not at all.
He frames literature as the operating system of our humanity, like a fundamental moral compass and the definitive dividing line between us and the animal kingdom. Okay, let's unpack this.
I love that framing. To fully grasp Al-Waily's framework, we really have to start with how he divides the overarching concept of literature, or adab in Arabic, into two distinct but heavily interdependent categories.
Okay, two categories. What's the first one?
First, he identifies cultural literature.
Cultural literature. Got it.
Yeah, and you can think of this as the pure mechanics of communication. It encompasses the vocabulary, the grammar, the rhetorical skill, and just the broad accumulation of factual knowledge.
So it's basically the tool set.
Exactly. It's the tool set. But then he introduces the vital second half, which is moral literature.
Okay, moral literature.
Right. And this represents the ethical core. It is the active refinement of human behavior, the capacity for compassion, and, well, the presence of a conscience.
So you have the tools, and then you have the ethics guiding the tools.
Precisely. And Al-Waily's central thesis here is incredibly stark. He posits that without the moral core, the cultural component, all those fancy words and intellectual acrobatics, is just completely worthless.
Wow. Completely worthless. That paints a rather intimidating picture of intellectualism, honestly.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, because if we take that to its logical conclusion, it means that someone possessing incredible skill, like the absolute master of cultural literature but lacking the moral core, is not just neutral but potentially hazardous.
That is precisely where the danger lies. Al-Waily argues that the fundamental purpose of literature is to refine human behavior.
To make us better.
Right, to continuously elevate us above our base reactive animal instincts. So when a writer or a speaker divorces their linguistic skill from that moral, elevating purpose, the tool ceases to be a tool for building.
And it becomes a weapon.
Exactly, it becomes a weapon.
The source material uses incredibly vivid imagery for that scenario, actually. Yeah. It suggests that using literature purely for personal gain or fake prestige, or to manipulate others, is akin to a hunter setting a trap.
That's a great analogy.
Right. It takes beautiful, carefully constructed words and turns them into fangs and claws.
Fangs and claws, yeah. It's a brutal image, but it's accurate.
Which really makes me think about modern equivalents. Because we see this all the time with, say, corporate PR apologies.
Oh, absolutely. The classic non-apology apology.
Yes. A company does something terrible, right?
Yep.
And they release this statement that is grammatically flawless, it's completely legally sound, and it hits all the right vocabulary notes.
It is perfect cultural literature.
Exactly. But as you read it, your skin just crawls because you can feel the absolute absence of moral literature. There is no actual remorse in there.
None at all.
It is just a trap made of words designed to manipulate public perception. So, does this mean that simply reading a lot of books doesn't actually make you a good person?
Based on the text, yes. That is a perfect contemporary application of the theory. The public instinctively recoils from those PR statements because, on a subconscious level, we recognize the manipulation.
We feel the trap.
Exactly. Al-Waily points out that when writers use their skills for hypocritical praise, or when they're paid to hurl insults, or when they try to manipulate the public for a quick payoff, their literature inevitably rusts.
It rusts. I love that word choice.
Right? It might have a temporary shine, it might survive the immediate news cycle, but because it lacks the pure gold of honesty, the fraud is always exposed by the corrosive nature of time.
The idea of language rusting is just fascinating. It implies that honesty is the only preservative that keeps words alive across generations.
Right, because true literature, the kind that seamlessly integrates both the cultural skill and the moral compass, operates on a completely different frequency.
How so?
Well, it doesn't just inform or entertain, it functions as a psychological medicine. Al-Waily writes that genuine literature has the power to heal sick souls across time.
Wow. Heal sick souls.
Yeah. When we read the beautifully articulated moral struggles of someone who lived hundreds of years ago, it builds empathy. It reminds us of our shared humanity.
Which brings light to our own dark times, I guess, and sharpens senses that the daily grind has just completely dulled.
Precisely. It connects us.
But if literature is primarily functioning as this moral compass and emotional medicine, we have to ask how it navigates the hard, objective reality we live in.
That's a great point.
Because literature doesn't just exist in poetry books, you know?
Hmm.
It has to interact with the cold, hard facts of fields like science.
It does.
So, playing devil's advocate for a moment here, isn't science supposed to be purely objective? Like, why does a researcher dealing in raw data and physical laws need to concern themselves with the subjective art of literature or making things sound pretty?
What's fascinating here is how Al-Waily completely dismantles that artificial wall between the subjective art of literature and the objective reality of science.
Oh, really? How does he do that?
He uses a highly relatable, everyday metaphor to bridge the gap. He says literature is like salt in the food of life.
Salt in the food. Okay, I like where this is going.
Without it, the meal might be nutritionally dense,
Yeah.
but it is completely tasteless and essentially unpalatable.
So you need the flavor to actually get the nutrients down.
Exactly. But beyond just making reality bearable, he argues there is a deeply necessary symbiotic relationship between the scientific mind and the literary mind.
So the subjective flavor is required to digest the objective fact.
Yes.
Think about the last time you, as a listener, tried to read a dense medical journal or a highly technical software manual.
Oh, it's painful.
Right. The facts in that document might be 100% true, but if the writing is utterly devoid of narrative or flow, your brain simply rejects it.
It just bounces right off.
You probably abandon the text regardless of how important the information was, so the poor communication actually sabotages the delivery of the science.
And Al-Waily would point to that exact phenomenon as a failure of integration. Let's examine the scientist side of the equation first.
Okay.
A researcher might uncover a world-changing, brilliant discovery in their lab. But if they lack that cultural literary skill, if their writing is dry, disorganized, or unconvincing, the discovery risks being completely ignored by the wider world.
Which is a tragedy.
It is. The text notes that good, articulate expression creates a halo of appreciation.
A halo of appreciation.
Right. It acts as a persuasive vehicle that delivers the scientific truth safely into the minds of the public. If that vehicle is broken down, the truth never arrives at its destination.
So the literary skill is basically the delivery mechanism for the scientific payload.
Precisely.
But the source material insists this is a two-way street, right? So how does the poet or the novelist rely on the physicist or the biologist?
Well, a writer cannot achieve true greatness. They cannot produce literature that resonates across centuries without a foundational understanding of reality.
Meaning they have to know how the world actually works.
Exactly. Which includes science, human psychology, the mechanics of the universe. If a writer ignores objective reality, their work becomes untethered and ultimately irrelevant.
It just becomes fantasy.
Right. And Al-Waily provides a brilliant summation of this mutual dependency. He says, literature without science is naive. Science without literature is raw.
Literature without science is naive. Science without literature is raw. That is wow. That dichotomy really highlights the necessity of both.
It's perfectly stated.
Because if you write with breathtaking prose but fundamentally misunderstand human nature or the physical world, your work is just naive fluff. And conversely, if you possess all the raw data of the universe but lack the ability to contextualize it within the human experience, it remains this undigested, raw lump of information.
They are two halves of a complete cognitive process. The logic provides the structure. And the literature provides the humanity.
Which naturally leads us to question the internal mechanics of how a human being actually synthesizes these two halves, because we aren't just algorithms sorting data into grammatically correct sentences.
No, we are much messier than that.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Al-Waily breaks down the internal psychological assembly line of how the most impactful communication is formed within us.
He does. He maps out a very specific sequential pathway that moves from instinct to intellect to ethics.
Right. He posits that the best communication starts in the heart, representing our raw emotions. From there, it must pass through the mind, and finally it is dyed or colored by the conscience, which is the soul or the moral core.
It's a fascinating progression.
While reading this sequential process, the analogy of a water filtration plant came to mind.
A water filtration plant. Okay, let's explore how that maps to Al-Waily's pathway.
So think of the heart as the source of raw, untreated water entering the plant. This water represents all of our emotions, and it is full of everything, both good and bad.
Okay.
The mind acts as the heavy, physical grate or filter. It is the logic that catches the dangerous debris and the large contaminants.
The bouncer at the nightclub, basically.
Exactly, a bouncer checking the IDs of our emotions. And finally, the conscience is the chemical treatment phase. It purifies the water, altering its fundamental composition to ensure it is life-sustaining rather than toxic, before it's finally pumped out into the world as words.
That is a highly effective way to visualize the mechanism, particularly because it emphasizes the necessary transformation of the raw material.
Because you can't just drink the raw water.
Right. Emotions, as the source points out, are the absolute bedrock of art. But they are volatile.
Yeah, because that raw water coming from the heart contains positive currents, compassion, love, joy, empathy. But it is also churning with incredibly destructive elements.
Anger, jealousy, hatred, greed.
Exactly. And all of these emotions are pushing to express themselves externally. The mind, that bouncer, that physical filter, has to evaluate the logic and the reality of those emotions. It has to catch the destructive debris.
And it must block those negative, purely destructive emotions, allowing only the constructive ones to pass through to the final stage where they are colored by the conscience.
The moral treatment phase.
Right. This is where the moral literature we discussed earlier is applied. If words are driven purely by negative emotions and they somehow bypass that intellectual filter, like if the mind's grate is broken or deliberately removed, the result is catastrophic.
Just pure toxicity flooding the system.
Exactly. The text explicitly mentions that allowing unchecked, unfiltered negative emotions to drive your narrative will inevitably spoil the good and spread toxicity.
So logic and reality act as the necessary constraint on our emotions. But that raises a big question about creativity.
Okay, what is it?
If the mind is strictly filtering based on hard reality and logic, where does imagination fit into this filtration plant? Don't the greatest writers have to step outside of strict reality to create something new?
That is a crucial distinction Al-Waily makes regarding the human condition. He argues that animals rely entirely on immediate reality to survive.
Right, they just react to what's in front of them.
Exactly. Their mental processes are bound strictly to the physical environment. Humans, however, possess the unique cognitive capacity to blend that external reality with our internal imagination.
We can synthesize what is with what could be.
Yes, we can draw from an internal reservoir that doesn't physically exist.
Wow.
And true geniuses, whether they are literary masters or scientific pioneers, draw heavily from this internal well of imagination. They pull visions from their internal world to enrich and expand the external reality for the rest of us.
But there's a risk there, right?
A massive one. The text issues a profound warning here. Sometimes, these individuals pull so heavily from their imagination that the tether to objective reality begins to fray.
They lose touch.
Right, they deviate significantly from the normal perception of the world.
Which borders on madness. Like if the mind's filter completely stops processing external reality and only processes internal imagination, the system just breaks down entirely.
Precisely. If someone completely severs ties with reality and exists solely within their imagination, that is the definition of madness.
So it's a balancing act.
Exactly. The genius, therefore, is the individual who balances right on that razor's edge, diving deep into the imagination, but retaining just enough connection to reality to bring those visions back and communicate them to the rest of us.
So we have this incredibly delicate internal factory. The heart provides the raw emotional power, the mind filters it through reality while balancing imagination, and the conscience gives it ethical weight.
That's the ideal process.
But as listeners, we have all encountered writing where it feels like that entire filtration system has collapsed.
Frequently.
Which brings us back to that dense, confusing text we talked about at the very beginning. When the filter breaks and pure ego bypasses the conscience, we get pretension.
Yes, we get the empty drum.
But I want to push back on this a bit because I think a lot of people feel a deep sense of insecurity when they don't understand a piece of complex writing.
That's very true.
We tend to assume the fault lies with us. Isn't it often the mark of a truly genius writer when they utilize highly obscure symbolism or intricate riddles that the average person simply cannot decode? Doesn't that indicate they are operating on a higher intellectual plane?
Emphatically, no.
Yeah.
And Al-Waily leverages his framework to completely dismantle this exact misconception.
Really? So it's not our fault?
Not at all.
Hmm.
He explicitly warns against this type of deliberate obscurity. He utilizes a very sharp metaphor, comparing pretentious, overly complex writers to an empty drum.
An empty drum.
Yes, the emptier the drum is on the inside, the louder and more hollow the noise it makes when struck.
Oh, that is a brutal assessment. But it perfectly captures that feeling of reading something loud but meaningless.
It does. He argues that utilizing deliberate obscurity and fake symbolism is essentially literary fraud.
Literary fraud.
Let's delve into the psychology of why a writer would do this. Often, it is a defense mechanism born out of profound insecurity. Writers use convoluted, impenetrable language to hide their own conceptual shortcomings.
So if their idea is bad, they just bury it in big words.
Exactly. If a writer's core idea is actually quite basic or unoriginal, stating it simply would expose their lack of genuine insight.
Right.
By wrapping it in a thick layer of jargon and complex riddles, they mask the emptiness and falsely elevate themselves, creating an artificial distance that makes them look superior to everyday people.
So the jargon is acting as a smokescreen. They are throwing smoke bombs into the room so the audience can't see that the room is actually empty.
That's a great way to put it.
Because if you write simply, you are incredibly vulnerable. People might disagree with you or realize your idea isn't that special. But if you write in a way no one can understand, you are safe from criticism because the audience is too busy feeling inadequate.
That is the exact psychological mechanism at play. If you are reading something and it feels unnecessarily complicated, it is highly probable that the author doesn't possess a clear grasp of their own subject matter, or they are prioritizing their ego over the transfer of knowledge.
But we have to acknowledge that literature and even everyday communication is heavily reliant on metaphors and symbols. I mean, we've used several in this deep dive alone.
We have.
So if deliberate obscurity is a fraud, when is symbolism actually a valid moral tool? How do we separate the meaningful metaphor from the empty drum?
The source material is very rigorous on this point. It outlines 3, and only 3, valid justifications for deploying symbolism.
Only 3.
If a writer's use of symbols doesn't clearly fit into one of these 3 categories, it is likely the literary fraud we just diagnosed.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first valid reason is to bring a distant, highly complex meaning closer to the reader's comprehension.
So using a symbol to take an abstract, ungraspable concept and give it a physical, relatable shape in the mind of the audience. That is essentially the opposite of being pretentious. It is an act of intellectual hospitality. You are doing the hard work of simplification for the reader.
Beautifully said. Yes, it's about connection, not distance.
Okay, what is the second justification?
The second justification is for sheer aesthetic beauty and linguistic conciseness.
Aesthetic beauty.
Right. Sometimes the goal isn't just to transfer data, but to evoke a profound emotional response through elegance. The text cites the great classical Arab poet Al-Mutanabi to illustrate this.
Oh, I'm excited for this.
He wanted to describe a woman who possessed a long, elegant neck. Now, he could have simply stated, she has a long neck.
Which is biologically accurate but entirely devoid of art.
Exactly. Instead, he utilized a symbol. He described her as having a distant earring drop.
A distant earring drop. Oh, wow. That is breathtaking.
Isn't?
By focusing on the vast space between her earlobe and her shoulder, he paints an instant, vivid picture in the reader's mind, using significantly fewer words, yet generating a much higher emotional impact.
Exactly. It achieves maximum aesthetic impact with minimal linguistic real estate. That is the hallmark of true literary mastery.
It's beautiful, but it's also highly efficient.
Yes. Now, the third valid reason for utilizing symbolism is deeply pragmatic, out of fear or the need for self-preservation.
Wait, using symbols out of fear, are we talking about writing in code to hide from a physical threat?
Precisely. Al-Waily points to the classic collection of fables, Kalilo Edamnella.
The animal stories.
Right. If you read these on the surface, they appear to be innocent, entertaining stories about talking animals. But beneath the surface, they're actually delivering potent political advice and sharp moral critiques directed at a tyrannical ruler.
Wow.
The authors existed in an environment where speaking truth to power openly would result in their execution. Therefore, they utilized the symbol of the animal kingdom to smuggle their message past the tyrant's guards.
That adds a fascinating layer of subversion to literature. So, symbolism is morally justified if you are simplifying a complex abstraction, generating profound aesthetic beauty, or literally trying to avoid execution while speaking the truth.
Those are the three.
If you are doing anything else, like if you are just trying to sound smarter than your audience, you are just banging an empty drum and hoping the noise confuses people.
Anything else is an ego-driven attempt to deceive. And, as the text reminds us, honesty is the literary equivalent of pure gold.
It never rusts.
It never rusts.
Yeah.
It might not always be the flashiest, most complex metal in the room, but it retains its intrinsic value forever, unlike the rusting, manipulative trap of the fraudulent writer.
You know, this framework represents such a massive paradigm shift. We began by discussing the abstract philosophy of literature, but this methodology truly applies to every facet of how we interact with the world.
It really does.
It brings it all back to how you, the person listening to this right now, consume and deploy information every single day.
Think about your own communication.
Exactly. When you sit down to write an email to your team, or when you're structuring a presentation for work, or even when you post a comment on social media, what is your underlying intent?
Are you communicating to genuinely connect?
Right. To share knowledge, to bring a distant meaning closer to your audience. Or are you succumbing to the empty drum, hiding behind industry jargon and convoluted sentences to mask a lack of substance and merely project the illusion of intelligence?
If we connect this personal reflection to the bigger picture, Al-Waily leaves us with a final thought that is both profoundly dark and incredibly urgent.
Okay, let's hear it.
We discussed at the outset how literature, specifically the moral component, is the definitive dividing line between humans and the animal kingdom. But his philosophy takes that premise a step further.
How so?
He observes that a human being who acquires vast amounts of cultural literature, the elite education, the expansive vocabulary, the sharp intellect, but completely fails to cultivate the moral literature, isn't simply regressing to the state of an animal.
What do they become?
They become something far worse and exponentially more dangerous.
Wait, worse. If you strip away the morality, aren't we just left with our primal animal instincts?
Because a wild beast only operates based on sheer survival instincts. A lion on the savannah doesn't hunt out of malice or greed or a desire for power.
Right. It hunts strictly because it requires calories to survive.
Exactly. It possesses no complex negative emotions like spite, vengeance, or the desire to mentally manipulate its prey. But a highly educated human being, someone completely devoid of that internal conscience we mapped out earlier, possesses all of those dark, complex emotions.
Oh, I see.
And critically, they now possess the intellectual tools to execute those dark emotions. They can use their vast knowledge and their beautiful, persuasive words to actively deceive, exploit, and destroy on a scale no animal could ever comprehend.
They take the highest achievements of civilization, language, and logic and invert them into weapons of mass manipulation.
Exactly.
They become the hunter intentionally designing the trap with fangs and claws.
Which raises an incredibly important question, perhaps the most vital question for our current era. In our modern world, we place an immense, almost exclusive premium on education, on technical skill acquisition, and on data processing.
We are structurally obsessed with accumulating cultural literature.
Yes, we are. But we must pause and ask ourselves, are our systems actually producing better, more morally refined human beings? Or are we merely creating highly efficient apex predators armed with sophisticated vocabularies and unprecedented access to information?
Wow. Apex predators with better vocabularies. That is a deeply chilling thought to leave on.
It forces a reckoning, doesn't it?
It really does. Are we utilizing our knowledge to build character, or are we simply using our education to sharpen our claws? It really forces you to reevaluate every piece of media you consume and scrutinize every word you choose to put out into the world through a completely different, much more rigorous lens. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the intent behind what you read. Keep demanding the moral core alongside the cultural skill. And whatever you do, make sure you aren't just banging an empty drum.